Now, do you know everyone? Sloane asked Harry and Neville. Blaise Zabinai is in your year, of course. Zabinai did not make any sign of recognition or greeting, nor did Harry or Neville. Gryffindor and Slytherin students loathed each other on principle. This is Cormac McLaggen, perhaps you've come across each other. No. McLaggen, a large, wiry-haired youth, raised a hand, and Harry and Neville nodded back at him. And this is Marcus Belby. I don't know whether. Belby, who was thin and nervous-looking, gave a strained smile. And this charming young lady tells me she knows you. Sloane finished. Ginny grimaced at Harry and Neville from behind Sloane's back. Well now, this is most pleasant, said Sloane cozily. A chance to get to know you all a little better. Here, take a napkin. I've packed my own lunch. The trolley, as I remember it, is heavy on licorice wands, and a poor old man's digestive system isn't quite up to such things. Pheasant, Belby. Belby started and accepted what looked like half a cold pheasant. I was just telling young Marcus here that I had the pleasure of teaching his uncle Damical, Sloane told Harry and Neville, now passing around a basket of rolls. Outstanding wizard, outstanding, and his Order of Merlin. Most well deserved. Do you see much of your uncle, Marcus? Unfortunately, Bib had just taken a large mouthful of pheasant. In his haste to answer Sloane, he swallowed too fast, turned purple, and began to choke. Anapneo, said Sloane calmly, pointing his wand at Belby, whose airway seemed to clear at once. Not much of him, no, gasped Belby, his eyes streaming. Well, of course, I dare say he's busy, said Sloane, looking questioningly at Belby. I doubt he invented the Wolfsbane potion without considerable hard work. I suppose, said Belby, who seemed afraid to take another bite of pheasant until he was sure that Sloane had finished with him. He and my dad don't get on very well, you see, so I don't really know much about. His voice tailed away as Sloane gave him a cold smile and turned to McLaggen instead. Now, you, Cormac, said Sloane, I happen to know you see a lot of your uncle Tiberius, because he has a rather splendid picture of the two of you hunting Nogtails in, I think, Norfolk. Oh, yeah, that was fun, that was, said McLaggen. We went with Bertie Higgs and Rufus Scrimger. This was before he became minister, obviously. Ah, you know Bertie and Rufus too? Beamed Sloane, now offering around a small tray of pies. Somehow, Belby was missed out. Now tell me. It was as Harry had suspected. Everyone here seemed to have been invited, because they were connected to somebody well-known or influential. Everyone except Ginny. Zabinai, who was interrogated after McLaggen, turned out to have a famously beautiful witch for a mother. From what Harry could make out, she had been married 7 times, each of her husbands dying mysteriously and leaving her mounds of gold. It was Neville's turn. Next, this was a very uncomfortable 10 minutes, for Neville's parents, well known as, had been tortured into insanity by Bellatrix Lestrange and a couple of Death Eater cronies. At the end of Neville's interview, Harry had the impression that Sloane was reserving judgment on Neville, yet to see whether he had any of his parents' flair. And now, said Sloane, shifting massively in his seat with the air of a Compare introducing his star act. Harry Potter. Where to begin? I feel I barely scratched the surface when we met over the summer. He contemplated Harry for a moment as though he was a particularly large and succulent piece of pheasant, then said, "The chosen one they're calling you now." Harry said nothing. Belby, McLaggen, and Zabinai were all staring at him. "Of course," said Sloane, watching Harry closely, "there have been rumors for years. I remember when, well, after that terrible night. Lily James, and you survived, and the word was that you must have powers beyond the ordinary." Zabinai gave a tiny little cough that was clearly supposed to indicate amused skepticism. An angry voice burst out from behind Sloane. "Yeah, Zabinai, because you're so talented at posing." "Oh dear," chuckled Sloane comfortably, looking around at Ginny, who was glaring at Zabinai around Sloane's great belly. "You want to be careful, Blaise. I saw this young lady perform the most marvelous bat bogey hex as I was passing her carriage. I wouldn't cross her." Zabinai merely looked contemptuous. "Anyway," said Sloane, turning back to Harry. "Such rumors this summer. Of course, one doesn't know what to believe. The Prophet has been known to print inaccuracies, make mistakes, but there seems little doubt, given the number of witnesses, that there was quite a disturbance at the ministry and that you were there in the thick of it all." Harry, who could not see any way out of this without flatly lying, nodded, but still said nothing. Sloane beamed at him. So modest, no wonder Dumbledore is so fond. You were there, then. But the rest of the stories, so sensational, of course, one doesn't know quite what to believe, this fabled prophecy, for instance. "We never heard a prophecy," said Neville, turning geranium pink as he said it. "That's right," said Ginny staunchly. "Neville and I were both there too. And all this chosen one rubbish is just the Prophet making things up as usual." "You were both there too, were you?" said Sloane with great interest, looking from Ginny to Neville, but both of them sat clam-like before his encouraging smile. "Yes, well, it is true that the Prophet often exaggerates, of course," Sloane said, sounding a little disappointed. "I remember dear Gwenog telling me, Gwenog Jones, I mean, of course, captain of the Holyhead Harpies." He meandered off into a long-winded reminiscence, but Harry had the distinct impression that Sloane had not finished with him, and that he had not been convinced by Neville and Ginny. The afternoon wore on with more anecdotes about illustrious wizards Sloane had taught, all of whom had been delighted to join what he called the Slug Club at Hogwarts. Harry could not wait to leave, but couldn't see how to do so politely. Finally the train emerged from yet another long misty stretch into a red sunset, and Sloane looked around, blinking in the twilight. "Good gracious, it's getting dark already. I didn't notice that they'd lit the lamps. You'd better go and change into your robes, all of you. McLaggen, you must drop by and borrow that book on Nogtails. Harry, Blaise, any time you're passing. Same goes for you, Miss." He twinkled at Ginny. "Well, off you go, off you go." As he pushed past Harry into the darkening corridor, Zabinai shot him a filthy look that Harry returned with interest. He, Ginny, and Neville followed Zabinai back along the train. "I'm glad that's over," muttered Neville. "Strange man, isn't he?" "Yeah. He is a bit," said Harry, his eyes on Zabinai. "How come you ended up in there, Ginny?" "He saw me hex Zacharias Smith," said Ginny. "You remember that idiot from Hufflepuff who was in the DA? He kept on and on asking about what happened at the ministry, and in the end he annoyed me so much I hexed him. When Sloane came in I thought I was going to got detention, but he just thought it was a really good hex and invited me to lunch." "Mad, eh?" "Better reason for inviting someone than because their mother's famous," said Harry, scowling at the back of Zabinai's head, "or because their uncle." But he broke off. An idea had just occurred to him, a reckless but potentially wonderful idea. In a minute's time, Zabinai was going to re-enter the Slytherin 6th year compartment, and Malfoy would be sitting there, thinking himself unheard by anybody except fellow Slytherins. If Harry could only enter, unseen, behind him, what might he not see or hear? True. There was little of the journey left. Hogsmeade Station had to be less than half an hour away, judging by the wildness of the scenery flashing by the windows, but nobody else seemed prepared to take Harry's suspicions seriously, so it was down to him to prove them. "I'll see you two later," said Harry under his breath, pulling out his invisibility cloak and flinging it over himself. "But what are you?" asked Neville. "Later," whispered Harry, darting after Zabinai as quietly as possible, though the rattling of the train made such caution almost pointless. The corridors were almost completely empty now. Nearly everyone had returned to their carriages to change into their school robes and pack up their possessions. Though he was as close as he could get to Zabinai without touching him, Harry was not quick enough to slip into the compartment. When Zabinai opened the door, Zabinai was already sliding it shut when Harry hastily stuck out his foot to prevent it closing. "What's wrong with this thing?" said Zabinai angrily as he smashed the sliding door repeatedly into Harry's foot. Harry seized the door and pushed it open, hard. Zabinai, still clinging onto the handle, toppled over sideways into Gregory Goyle's lap, and in the ensuing ruckus, Harry darted into the compartment, leapt onto Zabinai's temporarily empty seat, and hoisted himself up into the luggage rack. It was fortunate that Goyle and Zabinai were snarling at each other, drawing all eyes onto them, for Harry was quite sure his feet and ankles had been revealed as the cloak had flapped around them. Indeed, for one horrible moment he thought he saw Malfoy's eyes follow his trainer as it whipped upward out of sight. But then Goyle slammed the door shut and flung Zabinai off him. Zabinai collapsed into his own seat looking ruffled. Vincent Crabbe returned to his comic, and Malfoy, sniggering, lay back down across two seats with his head in Pansy Parkinson's lap. Harry lay curled uncomfortably under the cloak to ensure that every inch of him remained hidden, and watched Pansy stroke the sleek blonde hair off Malfoy's forehead, smirking as she did so, as though anyone would have loved to have been in her place. The lanterns swinging from the carriage ceiling cast a bright light over the scene. Harry could read every word of Crabbe's comic directly,